All right, everybody. I'm going to get started here. First of all, thanks for coming to part 2 of our 3-part series this week of AAM Ecosystem Working Group Kickoff. Definitely thanks to everybody for showing up on Monday. We had a really, really good turnout. I think it surprised all of us. About 300 people were registered for the in-person workshop. Had about 600 show up to the virtual kickoff, and I think we kept it short for you. Tried to give you an intro to some of the keynote type things we would have done at the beginning of day 1, and now into more day 1 type of content here today. We're gonna walk through some of the specifics moving forward. Talk a little bit about our working group implementation and such. We got a lot of great questions from the audience on our Conference.io app on Monday. We're working through those right now. I don't remember the number of questions, but maybe Michael will say it later. It was pretty huge. We've got a pretty good list of answers compiled that we'll share with you at some point here. Yeah, so Anna, if you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah, nothing happening yet. Sorry.
Did you get it now?
Yep, got it now. Thank you. So for today's agenda, I've got another couple minutes here to overview this for you. Michael Patterson's going to talk about our working groups, the specifics of the implementation, so what we're trying to accomplish, structures, that type of thing, and some of the immediate schedules, so not just this week and not just today and tomorrow, but talk to you a little bit about where we're going in the future. And then he's going to introduce some of the collaboration tools, including the portal that we have set up for the working groups. Doing this virtually is different, I guess, than we're used to with a big kickoff like this. We usually try to do them in person, bring the community together, get to meet all you, shake your hands. Shaking hands is a no-no right now, so we're getting really savvy with our virtual tools, Zoom included, and some of our ways to do surveys and just tricky ways to collaborate with each other over the internet in a virtual environment. So Michael will talk to you about that. And then we'll have our first kind of strategic technical brief, if you will. I gave a mission overview on Monday, but Star will come in and talk to you about our Grand Challenge National Campaign, now called, series. So she'll spend a little over right around 20 minutes on that, and then we'll go back to some Q&A if there is any more before we move into part 3 of this tomorrow. Next slide, please, Anna. So when it comes up, the next slide is just going to show you the Conference.io web address again, and use that just like you did last time. Ask questions over that Conference.io, and it still hasn't changed, just so you know. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I'm frozen, it seems like. I apologize.
Okay. It's a Conference.io web link. We'll get that back up to you. If you want me to try to share it real quick, Anna, I can. I have the slides open on my computer here too. Do you want me to try that, or?
Getting it back up now.
Okay, yeah, so just ask your questions in there. It records them. You can vote them up. We'll print out the questions at the end of the meeting, start taking a look at them and making sure we're providing responses back to your questions as comprehensively as we can. So please just get this link up in your web browser or on your phone or whichever way you prefer to do it. And then with that, I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks, Davis. And I'm going to take over control of the screen. So that link's going to go away, but I have copied and pasted it into your chat window so you can be able to access it easily that way, so you don't have to remember it, or if you didn't get a chance to write it down. So can Anna or Davis confirm that you do indeed see my screen?
Sound and visual good.
All right, great. So we appreciate everybody being here today. We know that there's a lot going on at this point in time, as we're all trying to figure out how to live life in a new way again. And we certainly hope you are all staying healthy. And we hope that this time of having to do everything virtually is indeed just a short period of time and not a longer long phase, but we'll see. And regardless, we're going to try to move forward still here with things, even if we are having to be remote for a while. And so I'll talk with you. Davis said some about that and just give you hopefully, actually throughout my presentation here, hopefully addressing some of the questions that came up on Conference IO last time. There were some good ones about the details of the implementation of the group. So I hope to be able to address those here, or at least some of them. Would encourage you to go to Conference IO and be upvoting things there. There's also a poll, which is something new that we're trying. So there's one poll question, and I'll open up another one here. They're very simple at this stage, as we're all just kind of learning all these new tools. And so we wanted to give you a chance to feel like what it is to be engaged. We do want this to be a very collaborative and interactive thing on the whole, which our in-person workshop, I think, had done a good job planning a lot of great interactive activities, and then we've had to try to pivot to figure out how to do all those virtually. So bear with us as we experiment with these tools and learn the ins and outs of them. We'll have some hiccups along the way, but hopefully nothing major, and hopefully you can learn from us and our mistakes, so that as you go and try to apply things yourself in your own institutions, you can be more successful as you move forward. And then all of us together, as we work as a part of these working groups, can hopefully be able to be more efficient and effective in this new virtual world. Quick intro to myself. Been at NASA about 5 years since graduate school. Been working in the general advanced air mobility realm, although that name is a new name, but been working on stuff like that effectively my entire time at NASA, and a few years prior to that in grad school too. So it's a fun area. I'm very excited about it personally, and excited to be working this with all of you moving forward. So wanted to highlight a couple of points just on this one slide, recapping some of what PK talked with you about, some of the vision of the working groups, like what's the point, why are we even talking about them. At the highest level, we recognize that this space is so complex and hits so many different aspects that we've got to all work together here in order to make this a real and practical transportation system. I mean, that's really what we're talking about doing, is introducing maybe not entirely new, but in some cases entirely new capabilities, and in other cases just vastly more widespread capabilities compared to what we have today. And so that's going to affect lots of different people, some people who are going to be excited about it and some who are not. And so we've got to find a way to bring all those people together, get everybody talking and engaged if we're going to actually make it a reality in any sort of a reasonable time frame. We are hoping very specifically for some of these kind of expected outcomes that you see listed on the screen. I'm not going to read through each one of them, but I will highlight that we are hoping to generate good dialogue that not only helps us, so we do look for help and helping gear what we're doing to meet your needs, both nearer and longer term. But we also hope that these can be places where, we're just kind of a facilitator to help get conversations started, and you're not having to work through us to make things happen, but you can meet somebody through these events and these virtual or in person as they may be in the working groups, and be able to foster those collaborations to help move the industry forward faster than any one of us could just trying to do it in our individual organizations. That said, we do also recognize that there are a lot of other activities that are already going on out there. And so the intention here is certainly not to duplicate any of those efforts. And so we do seek your input on where these groups can best find their niche amongst all the other stuff that is being done. So that is a topic that we will be looking for your feedback on in the very near term as we really kick these things off, and are hopeful that this new forum will be a place where we can amplify those existing efforts, and also then start new efforts that are needed still to be able to fill gaps that may exist out there. These will be maybe not 100% public, but effectively totally public meetings, and collaborations with people. So we are going to focus more on the pre-competitive type of concerns and overall things like industry consensus standards and thinking a lot of the big picture and helping set up a lot of that big picture vision. And then, your individual organizations will be the ones that dive down, and your own secret sauce will need to be kept in your own spheres, probably outside of these groups, unless you feel like giving that away to everybody for the good of the community. Then you're certainly welcome to do that. But these are intended to be open groups where we are all working together and really moving together as one large community, working hand in hand. I will highlight, since Star is going to talk right after me, the national campaign, or formerly known as the Grand Challenge, is a major part of our NASA's strategy as we move forward here, and we would certainly like to have your involvement there and your input on how to improve that. So Star will give you some overviews of that in a little bit, but that is one of the specific points that I will highlight that we are looking to get input on, and that we think can be a place where we can help foster collaborations across everybody, and including collaborations across all of our different projects that are working internally. So the groups themselves, 4 groups. So we've talked about 3 groups, and you're like, wait a minute, I only signed up for one of 3 groups. And that's correct, and that was intentional. So there's aircraft, airspace, and community integration. And then the 4th one is a cross-cutting group. So the cross-cutting group will include everyone that has signed up for any of the working groups. And exactly how we do all the meetings and things there are, we'll figure out as we go. We want each community, so that the aircraft more focused folks and the airspace more focused folks, the community more focused folks, we want to have them have their own deep dives and be able to have discussions amongst themselves with the discipline experts. But we also don't want everyone to be siloed and to never come together and to never have those big group conversations where we realize that, people were making an assumption in one place that's totally against an assumption that's being made in a different place. And so we want to have a venue to keep everyone on the same page. And so the cross-cutting working group is our current planned means for how we're going to do that. I'll mention too the general working group structure, kind of notional figures you see there on the right. We plan on each one of these working groups have some number of subgroups. So you'll see I numbered the first 2 and left the 3rd one there numbered as an N, so just some arbitrary number. We don't want it to have 1,000 different working groups or subgroups under it, but that number can move up and down as needed by you, the community, and the desires of the members of that working group in particular. So that may be 2 groups in one of them, and it may be 10 in another. We'll see as each group gets set up and figures out where there's a common interest and a desire to work on certain items. At this point, just some examples of subgroups that we plan on starting up are underneath the cross-cutting working group, having groups for the national campaign and for the concept of operations. And so you'll hear more about the national campaign a little bit later, and the ConOps is actually one of the things that we are planning on discussing early on in our in these working groups going forward, maybe even before we break into the individual other working groups going forward. So be on the lookout for more meetings related to that. In terms of leadership and membership, our thought is to have co-leads, one person from NASA and then one other person as a group elected person. So we do want there to be an industry voice here. And we want to listen to your needs and desires and have you be very much a part of helping direct the groups and the collaborations that go on within them, and in terms of setting up the subgroups and all of that. And so you as individuals have likely all or many of you have already signed up for one of the 3 working groups. So you will get to self-select where you want to be there. And then the cross-cutting group, as I mentioned, will include everybody on those invites, just to make sure that we are bringing everybody together. The plan is to have each of the working groups meet somewhere on the order of once a month to once a quarter, and that to be determined ultimately by the group and what the group feels they need to do. I would imagine, early on there will be a few more meetings to get just everything set up, people on the same page, decide on what subgroups you want to have, and then after that, I could see it being less frequent. So we don't plan to be very heavy-handed and dictate, but to let the groups do what they need to do to function as best they can. And then between those main working group meetings, the different subgroups or any other groups that may pop up would be able to meet at more frequencies as they would desire to be able to accomplish whatever task that group is set up for. Anticipate really kicking off these meetings in the probably late April or May timeframe, just depending on how things fall out here and how well we're able to all adjust to working remotely all the time. So bear with us as we continue to evolve that schedule and just react to how things are working in these virtual environments as we go through these meetings and test things out. Also planning for each of these working groups to have 2 face-to-face meetings a year. So we were originally supposed to kick off earlier this month with our first one. Now the plan is to have one tentatively anyway in the same venue in the DC area, July 7th through 9th. That is not a finalized date, so please don't start booking your travel yet, particularly in light of who knows when we'll be able to travel again. But we are working towards that, and we'll be planning to hold that, assuming that coronavirus concerns have indeed decreased sufficiently to allow travel to be a prudent thing to do in the July timeframe. And there's also been talk, and I'm not sure if we're going to call it a UAM convention or an AAM convention, the possibility of holding some working group meetings in conjunction with that, which I think is currently planned on the September timeframe. But same caveats there that depends on how the future unfolds. I know events are changing around all the time, so we'll hopefully be able to nail that down and get you more information in the next month or two on those future dates, but wanted to get those on your calendar. And I hope you've heard as I've been talking that we want these groups to be flexible and to fit the needs of all of you in the ecosystem, right? All the different people working the different pieces of the puzzle. We want these to be a venue that is useful at the end of the day. So if we set up some really rigid structure that is not working, we are not going to be beholden by it and stuck with it forever. So we do seek your input. So if you've got particular comments, please go ahead and stick them in the Q&A on Conference.io. I'll do another plug for that. Or feel free to just hold those thoughts, and as we go through future meetings, be sure to bring them up. But I'd appreciate hearing sooner rather than later if you've got thoughts on this initial structure. Just go ahead, sticking in the Conference.io is the best bet at this point. Also thinking about the groups and how they'll execute, we realize that we are all now located in not even just many different offices over the country, but many different homes and apartment buildings and everything else, and all over the world, I should say. So we've got lots of different people in many different time zones. We know that not everyone will be able to join everything always at the same time when it occurs. So we are assessing different means of collaboration, both to help with our physical distancing, even if we're in the same time zone now with our colleagues that we used to sit across the hall from, but also those who sit far away. And then other means of collaborating, between meetings and sorts of different discussions and ways to share files with one another and everything else. The long and short of it is we are working on a portal, which I'll bring up a demo for you now, and I will highlight it is just a demo, so don't read too much into it yet at this point, but this is kind of what we're thinking. This can be kind of a one-stop shop for where we all come to access all the things related to the working group. So just there'll be some quick information at the top about what the specific working groups are. There'll be a place to register. We're still working on the details here. If you've already registered for a working group, we're going to try to just roll that over directly to be in access to this page. It's kind of your one-stop shop to access all of our collaboration tools. But we may have to have some folks register here individually as well. So TBD a little bit on that. And then we will have links here to whatever our final collaboration tools are. So you see some examples of what those could be and some of the things that we're working towards now. There's still some details on to get figured out on if we can actually implement all these. Clearly we are on Zoom right now. So we plan to continue to use that sort of thing moving forward for these types of in-person live meet, or not in person, but real-time live meetings. We're looking at other tools such as Google Drive or Box or things like that to be able to share documents with one another, kind of have an archival location for them and potentially collaboratively edit, so that say you can get together in a subgroup meeting and be banging through a Word document or a PowerPoint or something like that as you go through. Also looking at ways to continue conversations outside of the regular meeting times, because we know that not everybody can always join live, and so they're not able to jump into the conference IO and directly ask the question that we'll answer at the end, or
Hey, Michael,
whatever else. So yes.
We're only seeing your slide here, not the actual portal.
Thank you for speaking up. I intended to change and totally forgot. So I'm talking to something that wasn't showing up. So appreciate that. Are you seeing the portal now, Mike?
Yes, we're up. We're live.
All right, great. So again, that's me figuring out how to learn to use the collaboration tools appropriately. So I think a lot of that stuff was that I said up top. Talking about the working groups and registration, then we'll have links to the different tools, so you'll be able to, hopefully not have to register for every meeting in the future, for instance, and just come here and access and see the schedule of upcoming meetings, the virtual meeting side, document collaborations. You don't have to remember what URL to go to find it. I come here to be able to get the file archive and edit documents real time. And then as I was saying, some way to communicate outside of the meeting time, so that it could be something like a Slack or maybe a custom message board type thing. We're still trying to figure out the options there. But a way for conversations to continue, and for those folks who weren't able to join live to be able to have those. Also plan to have direct links to upcoming events, so information about them, so you see the meeting we're in now and one we have on the calendar for tomorrow. Kind of some sort of news and highlights section in here too. So just, hey, this is kind of some stuff that's happened in the recent past, and maybe these will be hyperlinks at the end of the day to learn some more information, or to access a file that got created, or see a final product from one of the other working groups that got put out. And then thought is to have kind of an archive down here to past meetings and things that you can come to and be able to quickly access previous meetings. So I know that's a question about, being able to come back and watch meetings later in the future, and that is something that we are working towards being able to do. So that kind of portal that I just demoed, hopefully you're seeing my slides again. Please someone speak up if you're not, is hopefully going to be that kind of one-stop shop. So you don't have to remember what tool we're using for what, and if we have to change tools for any reason, it will just be a seamless thing for all of you working in the working groups. One quick final comment to close out. Those of you who've been familiar with what we've been doing, we've had this kind of 5-pillar framework, as we've called it, that's kind of organized everything that we do. And the current working group structure is really kind of a simplification of these 5 pillars into the 3 that you kind of see down here on the right. So what we call vehicle development and production, and individual vehicle management and operations. So really the aircraft design and piloting type of considerations. So aircraft and airmen type things would be in the aircraft working group. The airspace working group will include the airspace system design and implementation, so a lot of the infrastructure, CNS infrastructure and the like. And then the airspace and fleet operations management, this is getting into like your air traffic management and fleet operations side of things. We're bucketing those in the airspace pillar. or airspace working group, I should say. And then the community integration pillar does map one-to-one with our community integration working group. So hopefully that's helpful background for some of you to know where to plug in if you haven't figured that out. And if it's not helpful for you, just forget that I even showed the slide and plug in where you think is best. And actually right now, so I'll as I pass it over to Star, so Star, you can start sharing as you've got time. I'm going to open up another poll on the conference IO that asks you which of those 4 working groups, including the cross-cutting one, which I failed to mention, right, that kind of goes across all those things and looks at the interfaces really between them all. Which one of those working groups are you most excited about? So we just threw a new poll open. Yeah, several of you have already answered. So Star, take it away when you're ready, and I look forward to some Q&A at the end.
Okay, Michael, you can see my slides?
Yep, I'm seeing it's not in presentation mode right now, but yep, I'm seeing your window, and I'm hearing your voice fine.
All right, thanks. Let's see, I'll do the video so everybody can see me. Okay, well, let's get started. So thanks, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My first name is Star. Last name is Ginn. I just make sure I explain that to people. Most people get those two mixed up and think my last name is Jen. But first name is Star, last name Ginn, Harjeet. I'm super excited to be leading this national campaign. I have been working in the electric propulsion aircraft side of things since 2011. Helped develop the NASA Leap Tech project and the X-57. I'm really enjoying learning more about the airspace side and how we're going to integrate that with the vehicle capabilities. My background is 23 years or 24 years now doing flight research of one-of-a-kind vehicles out at NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center. So today I'm going to go over an overview of the national campaign. I will kind of piece in there some highlights of what we're going to be doing tomorrow. So tomorrow, if you haven't signed up, there's another meeting where we'll talk about what these breakout groups are going to look at, what tools we're going to use, and then national campaign will be the first one that we kind of go through what the breakout topics will be. And then after tomorrow, we'll let you know what next week looks like. Okay, so I'm going to go in presentation mode now. Okay, so presentation mode. So on the national campaign, our goal is to ensure the advance air mobility safety and accelerate scalability through integrated demonstrations and candidate operational concepts and scenarios. So when you see our objectives below, those are very specific to candidate operational concepts and scenarios. We aren't focused on vehicle certification, but vehicle performance is going to be very critical in how we construct the airspace and how densely we can manage the traffic. And so until we figure that out about the UAM vehicles, that could be a feeder into what the minimum requirements are for like stability and control, for instance, on the vehicles. But we'll be developing these flight procedures. And we mentioned that all of these objectives, we're working very closely with the FAA. They're a partner in the national campaign. We have been meeting with each other for the last year. Every week we have a 2-hour meeting where we go over these scenarios and breaking them down into individual task elements that we need to measure. There's about 20 different lines of business that we're working with across air, flight standards, and ATO. And it's very important that we have an integrated conversation as we're talking about these operations, because every piece of the mission of that vehicle needs input from air, AFS, and ATO simultaneously. So we make sure that those meetings are all very integrated across the FAA's disciplines and NASA's disciplines. So we will eventually get to evaluating the CNS trade space, so communication, navigation, surveillance trade space of GPS denied environments, detect and avoid. We'll obviously be demonstrating an airspace operations management architecture. We'll be leveraging the UTM construct, but obviously we'll have to have we'll be above 1,000 feet, and we'll be integrating with the national airspace, and there will be places where we'll have to still be communicating with ATC, and those are some of the things that we'll be understanding as we go through the national campaign series. And then, of course, the community characterization for us in the national campaign, this is focused on noise, working with the Revolutionary Vertical Lift Technology Project at NASA and the Aeronautics Mission Directorate. Of course, the Objective 4, we're working in partnership with the Air Traffic Management Exploration Project, and so they're also a partner project. And I also put a link down here at the bottom. So since our updating of our name, we've got our public-facing website updated. And so when we get done with this meeting, I hope you guys go look at what we have there. Okay, so you've seen these UAM maturity levels. And so I just want to make a few clarifications on this. That some people get, even on our team, kind of get mixed up with we have these UMLs 1 through 4. We also have the national campaign series that's 1 through 4. These aren't one for one. So what this is trying to map is industry, something to talk to where we can talk about where industry is in their certification process. So this is like actual certification operations. And to jump from each of these UMLs, the differences between them is an increase in automation between the pilot, the vehicle, the airspace, and the airspace construct, and the complexity of those operations with the general national airspace. And so when we talk about the national campaign series, we're working towards how do we get to a UML 3, which Davis mentioned yesterday, and we have basically 4 steps of progressions to get there. Now, obviously, we can't go through those progressions to try to understand what UML 3 is. Again, we're not saying that vehicles are certified to UML 3 when we're doing the national campaign, but we will be developing the requirements necessary for the FAA to work with industry on here are some of the guidelines or flight guidelines, operational testing, that a lot of empirical data is going to have to be developed to come up with those regulations. Okay, and also tomorrow we're going to do a couple polls. And so one of the polls will be where do you see yourself in 2028 at which UML level? And so some people might be very comfortable that even in 2028, I'm just going to be operating at maybe say UML 1 or 2. So we actually, there's Part 135 operations are already approved, and right, maybe you're going in and out of like not so dense kind of areas and existing infrastructure. But that kind of helps. That poll will help us survey through our series how aggressive do we think we need to be. And so this is kind of a depiction of those UMLs, of what the different business models look like, rural or urban. And so we'll have this picture up, and want to get feedback of where you guys see yourselves in 2028 in one of these different business models. This is another slide that Davis showed yesterday, and so the thing I wanted to point out here, so we talked about the campaign as a series. This is about the cadence of it. We're hoping that each of the national campaign flight demonstrations, if you look up at the top, there's the orange industry proposed UML2 unlock. So this is information we're trying to get updated. This assessment of where industry thought they would be, was taken 1 or 2 years ago. We'd like to see through this these polls if we think we're going to be able to enable those unlocks at these timeframes. So one of the things, another partner project in NASA Aeronautics that will be helping the national campaign is our automation research and capability development project. So they'll also be working with industry and us to develop some of the automation tools necessary for, you know, the aviate, navigate, communicate pieces. And so even if industry isn't ready to have the higher levels of automation through the series, we'll be able to leverage this automation research project to bring those tools to bear, either on a NASA demonstrated vehicle or helping to implement the features on our national campaign partnered vehicle companies. Okay, so a little bit about where we are in the national campaign. So right now we're getting ready for developmental testing, and the point of developmental testing is there's things we got to get in place and, you know, maturity levels that we need to understand with industry before we jump into the first national campaign. So the developmental testing will help us understand the readiness of NASA to deploy our capabilities to external ranges. So we have a mobile operating facility for range safety. We have an airspace test infrastructure capability that plugs in our mobile operating facility to the airspace management system. And so we'll be checking that that's all working and safe and the connectivity strong. And the fact that we have the right tools in place to be range agnostic or test site agnostic. We're also looking at the readiness level of these operational scenarios we're developing with the FAA. So to give us a chance to rehearse that we're capturing, you know, the right procedures. The next line, it'll help us understand that we're collecting the right data and how we're collecting that data in a data portal that's going to be searchable with metadata information. That will allow us to assess our partners, both on the vehicle side and the airspace side of their safety case that they're ready to execute National Campaign 1. And then for National Campaign 1, if our vehicle companies tell us basically where they want to do their flight tests. And so we're tailoring our scenarios and where we're testing based on where the vehicle companies are requesting to do that. So we'll have to, wherever that is that they're going to be testing, we'll have to make sure that those external ranges are prepared to do that test. So on the developmental testing for flight, again, we're looking to refine the integrated operational scenarios, maximize the impact on NC1. We have a dry run that we're going to be doing out at Edwards with a helicopter. Again, this will help make sure that the connectivity, not just from the NASA system communication, but to the vehicle is in that airspace system is all connected. We have what we're calling these urban air mobility task elements. These are basically the parameters that we are collecting for the FAA along all those different lines of business that I mentioned, and making sure that, you know, we're basically trying to understand if we have the right design of experiments in this dry run testing before we do the developmental testing. So right now there's regulations in place across how you do terminal-based operations, what heliports are supposed to look like, you know, what Part 23 or 27 looks like. Now we have these powered lift vehicles. So we have a measuring stick of what's in the current standards. And so our design of experiments is trying to figure out, are we better or are we worse than what currently is in the rules? So we'll also be able to look at the network delays, vehicle measurement bias errors that build up, and then tailor better these calculations around the vehicle performance that we're actually working with. On the simulation side, again, let me point out the link at the bottom. So we have a video, about an 8-minute video we put together to depict what the national campaign test will look like. It's only scenario 1 of our scenarios, but it shows the interaction of the pilot, the airspace system, the routes that we're flying. You can see there's a desert landscape under there because our dry run is out at Edwards, but we'll be testing out all the functionality between the vehicle and the airspace system while we do that dry run testing. And so we're going to look at, like I mentioned before, system connectivity between the vehicle and airspace environment, any kind of latencies, understand the right procedures and information exchange. Do we have the right timing for situational awareness for the pilots on board or off board? Just understand basic format and the ingestion of the airspace constraints and air traffic, how it's going to negotiate with airspace rules and procedures. And so we have 11 airspace partners that we are working on these scenarios in the simulation environment, and we're evaluating what kind of tools or capabilities that they're going to be able to provide in these scenarios, demonstrate vehicle airspace system integration between virtual and hardware in the loop, and then demonstrate the extended UTM airspace capabilities in support of the National Campaign 1 scenario requirements. So we started out with an API for UTM TCL4. That API, during this initial simulation testing, will develop into something that also has access to ATC and more of the national airspace rules. Okay, so here's an exciting schedule to show everybody. We announced our partners, and this is a depiction and timeline of how we're working with all those partners, and when we'll be soliciting for new partners. So at the top and the right is basically the different partners and how we're working with them. So at the top you see Joby Aviation is the vehicle company that signed up with us for developmental testing. Right now we notionally are planning to fly with them and those scenarios first quarter of 2021, and this will be flying a manned vehicle. We also have partnered with Bell, and we will be working with Bell and their App 70 project, that is a NASA SIO project, to start developing scenarios 5 through 7. So right now for developmental testing, we've developed scenarios 1 through 3, and we'll talk about that further later. And that's what we'll be testing with Joby. In the meantime, we need to develop scenarios 5 through 7 for the vehicles in National Campaign 1 that are going to sign up with us and are going to be ready to have the technologies on them to do GPS denied environments, detect and avoid ground-based, air-to-air based. So we will have that exercise. Another piece of Bell's proposal that we are executing is utilizing Alliance Airport in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, as a testing spot for Bell to do National Campaign 1. So we have a timeline with that organization to come up with adapting our scenarios, our own routes that is not the fixed wing or helicopter routes that exist at that airport, but our own routes to integrate into that same airport and infrastructure. So we have vehicle information exchange. This is still open for vehicle companies. The point of this was to assess the readiness of other vehicle companies for National Campaign 1, which is maybe quarter 2 to quarter 3 in 2022. So this will allow us to, early on provide some information of what we need to see in these operational environments and shadow their development with our flight safety team, so we're not duplicating too much extra work on the company as they get closer to flight. So this allows us to look at their reviews and understand, the safety case that we're going to present to do these operations. And then again, I said we have the airspace annex. We have 11 companies that are currently working what we're calling the X3 simulations with the ATMX project. And those simulations will help inform those and the flight tests that we're doing in the dry run will help inform what they start working on for X4 simulations, which is what we'll be using in the National Campaign one. So we have NASA partner agreements. So again, we still have the information exchange open for vehicles only. That was the intent of that exchange. The airspace partnership is closed right now. We have lots of companies to work with. But about quarter two in 2021, after we gather lessons learned from doing the development of flights, developing more scenarios, getting ready for the X4 simulations. We'll then have enough information to put the requirements in an agreement, announcement of collaboration opportunity agreement for NC1 partnership. And then you can see where we're hoping timeframe for dry run and when NC1 begins. Like I mentioned, we have 20 different lines of business in the FAA we're working with. We have this amazing spreadsheet that really needs to get converted into a database. But everywhere there's a purple box is an area where we're trying to fill a gap or help inform how UAM might be different in that box. And behind each of these boxes, we have which of them are tied to which scenarios we're going to be flying. And those scenarios are tied to which task elements that we're going to be measuring. Behind each of those task elements, there's lots of calculations like you see here in the bottom left these calculations are based on the performance of the vehicle. And then behind those calculations is actually the instrument we're going to be measuring with and the fidelity of that measurement that we need for that particular, to collect for that particular empirical data. And each of those elements of what we're measuring is broken down into each phase of flight. So this is across the vehicle, airspace construct, and airspace management. And so when you look at those UMLs, what needs to happen is we have to start showing how we're going to automate different functions of the human. And so an example that a lot of people in the autonomy world around vehicles have been using is I can break out a pilot's functions into aviate, navigate, communicate, but even below those, right, there's aircraft control, observe, airmanship rules. You can see all the things that a pilot's responsible for. So what of these functions do we need to start automating as we progress through not only the national campaign, but getting to those higher UMLs? So the automation project will be looking at that across the controller and the pilot. Obviously, we've seen very good results of how you automate controller with the UTM project. And now we just have to understand what's appropriate to automate when we're in the national airspace. We have our own maybe designated routes, and there's going to be times where there's contingencies that we're going to have to still be interfacing with ATC and voice communication. So we'll be exploring that in the national campaign. And then one most people probably haven't heard about, but the Terpsters are the ones that create the airspace construct. This is in flight standards. And so the obstacle avoidance, the approaches and landings, the placards that you see around airports takes quite a bit of time to do for any new airport or if anything's changed around an airport. So that's something as we start to look at on-demand flight planning that maybe, isn't already in an approved route, that's already constructed, around regular airports and such. but this starts getting us to the higher UMLs where we want to know like, what the traffic is right at that moment that we're putting our flight plan in, and understand through the FAA databases where all the obstacles are in that area, and what are the different approaches and departure options for those areas. So something to think about as we're going through the series. Another thing that we think is important to understand is if you just read, what a microplex is, they try to come up with efficient approaches and departures and paths using performance-based navigation, reducing level offs, segregating and expediting departures, and realigning airspaces so that they can get more efficiency out of everybody coming into a big metroplex. You could take all those exact same words and apply it to one airport that already, has fixed wing patterns. Depending on the winds, you're going to come in on one end of the airport versus the other. There's different helicopter paths that aren't as regulated, but they're kind of just more of, you operate out of that airport, where helicopters are coming in and out. But we really need to we need to leverage all this existing infrastructure that we have between airports, and have some heliport or vertiport areas at these airports. And those will need their own routes. They'll need their own loiters. We're looking at what's the most optimized loiter for an electric VTOL that has limited energy and reserves, and how we bring them into that existing infrastructure. And so to do that, you obviously probably have to look at, maybe you can keep the fixed wing helicopter routes as is, but they'll have to be something more coordinated and efficient to increase the density of what you're trying to do with the eVTOL aircraft at that operation. So on the left, you can see out at Edwards during the dry run, we'll be practicing some of these approaches and departures, different glide slope angles. We'll be trying to understand the difference between a heliport and what a vertiport means, and the different routes are with different wind shifts. So that's some of the things we'll test out pretty early. National campaign, 1 and 2 are looking at the operational safety and then the complexity of that operation. So we'll, if in national campaign 1, we're just doing scenarios 1 through 3, so we won't have, we won't be expecting the detect and avoid capabilities or GPS denied capabilities unless the vehicle companies are coming with that. Then we'll have scenarios ready for them, and we can execute some of those different contingencies. Really, our scenarios are based on, the first one is just a very benign, let's make sure we have a good baseline data where there's no anomalies, and then we start bringing in more and more complex anomalies into the scenarios. So again, like I said, we're looking at automated arrival, approach, and departure procedures, what our fail operational simplified controls and management looks like, detect and avoid airborne and surface hazards, adaptive trajectory planning and full envelope auto flight, automated contingency planning and execution. So one of our breakouts will be, looking at the whole series, and we'll go over these tomorrow. One of our breakouts will be looking at National Campaign 1 versus 2 and what we're trying to advance between the two campaigns. And a third breakout that we're going to have is really to get, roll your sleeves up and get into the engineering of what does terminal-based operations with contingencies look like. So there'll be more on that tomorrow. And I took up too much time, so we have some minutes for questions if Davis wants to take us to questions.
Thanks, Star. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. I had to get off 2 mutes there. Yeah, so just a couple minutes for questions here. There's at least 2 I see that are voted pretty high that I've identified earlier in the voting process as worthwhile. If you could say a couple words, Star, about how you kind of scenarios and different ranges apply to a ConOps for national campaign and what you have as far as a ConOps for national campaign, a minute or less, and then Michael, maybe if you could just kind of talk broadly about our UAM ConOps overall to contrast the two different uses of the words ConOps. So start with ConOps for national campaign and just describe that general ConOps real quick. I think you went over a lot of it with the scenarios and everything recently, but questions?
Right. So, so we in the national campaign, we refer to our operations as scenarios because we're diving real deep into the contingencies of those scenarios. The NASA and Deloitte have had a contract to go over ConOps, and they're focused on specifically UML4. So for the national campaign, we are focused on the near term. So we are working with the FAA to start with the crawl, and as we go through the series, we'll be walking and hopefully running by the end. And so ConOps with NASA, Deloitte is UML4. Our ConOps, our scenarios will be looking initially at existing airports, existing infrastructure, with very standard contingencies that any vehicle and pilot is going to need to be able to show their safety case for. But included in this will be how do we take the voice communication away and use a UTM-like system for the eVTOL.
Yeah, and Star covered a little bit of the broader point, but I guess one more point to make on the broader ConOps effort that Deloitte has been helping us with. Focused on UML4, and I think large motivation for that, right, is to give us a target to shoot for in the future, as opposed to being only focused about what we need to do tomorrow to begin operations, which is certainly something we need to worry about, right? Don't hear me wrong. We need to worry about that. But we also need to have a strong vision for where we're trying to go and where we're trying to work towards. It's kind of like if you're mowing your lawn, you're trying to do nice straight lines. If you're looking straight down right at the mower, you're going to end up jagging and not going super straight, right? But if you look far ahead and you're pointing your mower at the place where you want to go, you can end up having a nice straighter line. So that's kind of an analogy there for you. So hopefully by keeping some of our focus on that longer term, we can hopefully help push us all more directly to where we want to go and get there more cleanly than we would if we were all just trying to do things tomorrow and not have a farther term vision.
Thanks, Michael and Star. And just for everybody else out there, they're both activities that are really just getting off the ground. So it'll all merge together as we move forward and progress. The other question, Michael, start with you, and then maybe Star, if you want to add a little bit of perspective. It'll be our last question, I think. There's a couple things on here about who's in what working group. We don't need to dive way down in. There's obviously a lot of stuff that's cross-cutting as well. But there's a specific question about airports and vertiports as part of community or airspace. So, Michael, if you could talk about kind of from the working group perspective, and then Star, just maybe bring it back full circle to how you plan to work with those types of groups in national campaign.
Yeah, so I think there are places for infrastructure more broadly across all the different working groups, potentially. So the focus of, say, an airport or vertiport function in the airspace group would be more on how that's going to influence the, arrival and departure procedures and the amount of throughput you can get through the vertiport, the sort of equipment that you need in order to support those procedures and the like, right? Whereas on the community side, I would think that the focus on the vertiport there would be more on how, where do we put them from a community integration standpoint, like, say blending into higher noise areas might be an example of something you might want to try to do, or ways to get high passenger throughput, through some sort of security screening and people, dropped off by a car, or how to have other sort of multi-mode transit integration sort of things. So I think there will be elements of infrastructure that appear in different groups. And so there's probably not a single place where some of those things happen, but that's a conversation we need to have as the group gets stood up, or groups get stood up. And maybe it makes sense to create, say, an infrastructure subgroup in the cross-cutting because of that. So that's a conversation we'll have as we dive into things.
Yeah, my answer is that national campaign working groups will always be talking about airports and vertiports. It's one of the key pieces of what we're trying to understand in these operations.
Good. And there are opportunities to host national campaigns at airports and vertiports if you're in one of those regions or early adopter cities, or if your community is progressing towards UAM operations. So I want to thank everybody for their time, and Star and Michael for the presentations. Hopefully this has been good, these first two parts, getting everybody oriented to some of the big picture topics we have. You know, the list is long of what we owe you. We owe you individual briefs on each of the working groups and what's within them to talk about some of these topics and some of the things Michael mentioned earlier. And we owe you some real breakout sessions and real work. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of that stuff tomorrow and how we're going to get to real breakout sessions. And, you know, Star mentioned about getting your hands dirty in the technical. I'm sure some people are dying to do that. Other people are looking more strategic. So we're going to start creating those forums for you. We'll talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. But for now, thanks everybody for the hour and 3 minutes. Sorry about the extra 3 minutes there. But we appreciate your time, and we hope this is useful to you. Keep asking the questions. We'll keep answering them, and we'll make everything that we can public and get it posted to NARI's portal as quick as we can. Any other closing comments from anybody in the team?
I'll try to look through some of those questions tonight and maybe have some answers ready for tomorrow during the Q&A.
Great, yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
We will have some time tomorrow during the Q&A to take a little bit more of this and hit some of the high-level ones we've got across the couple of meetings we've had so far. Thanks, Star. Good point.
Yeah, and feel free tonight to go in and add another question or two and upvote as well. More things, or have your colleagues who weren't able to join do the same thing, and we'll try to address questions more tomorrow.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you.